All right, well, they're also paying attention to all things in China. Investors have turned cautious after the disappointing release of China's manufacturing PMI, which unexpectedly shrank in October, pointing to more economic headwinds ahead. And I think Matt Maley, friend of our show over at Miller Tabak, really nailed this. We were just talking about the market's advance in October, really under this notion that we get this great reopening. The U.S. continues to reopen from the pandemic. China starts to recover, but this really puts a dent in that thesis.
It's not just manufacturing PMI, it's non-manufacturing. The services sector also contracted on the month as well. So both of those are problematic at a time when there are now an uptick in COVID breakouts in the country, which means, as we have seen, lockdowns.
Yeah, and with those lockdowns, it comes impacts to operations and production. An iPhone plant, according to sources that Reuters was able to get in contact with, an iPhone plant could see a 30% output drop. You compare that with what we had just heard from Apple last week during their earnings and where they're actually expecting to try and ramp up demand, given what they've already seen in the higher end models of their iPhone. That could be a near-term headwind for Apple. We're seeing pre-market them down by about 1.5%. Let's also check in on Disney here, too, because ultimately that means with some of the lockdowns, perhaps you're going to see resorts shutter their visitors. We know that there have been reports of visitors being kept inside for testing as well. Walt Disney Company down by about 60%.
Yeah, the Shanghai Disney says that's what's happening.
Yeah.
They shut down the resort. And this is what's been happening in China, is that when there is an outbreak, when there's a report of someone who's had COVID at a particular location, whether it be Disney, whether it be a Foxconn plant, whether it be a restaurant, whether it be a hotel, as soon as they get that report, they shut the place down and they have a quarantine for a certain period of time. So that seems to be what's happening at Disney. There were reports over the weekend at Foxconn plants that because the shutdowns have been so draconian, now apparently the workers have wised up. When there's some reports of what's going to happen, there's been social media reports over the weekend that the workers are flooding from those plants. They're leaving because they don't want to be shut in the plants. So if that's true, then that definitely is an issue potentially for production.
And breaking it down even further, I'm glad you mentioned Apple, because there's a lot of recent notes after they reported earnings about the new innovations Apple might bring to market next year. Have seen some notes of a new potential foldable iPhone, new AR and VR glasses. But if this situation continues with these lockdowns into the middle of next year, as many expect, perhaps you don't get these innovations, perhaps you don't get a reacceleration in Apple sales and profits, and perhaps you see a lower Apple stock price.
The only thing I dislike more than foldy iPhone is a yellow plane in the sky, quite honestly, here. So we'll see if foldy phone takes off.
Yeah, I don't know. Apple usually has a way. Usually it causes hiccups for Apple. It does not cause anything that
Should make
dramatic.
these things in the U.S. Should make them in the U.S. I'll pay more for it.
How much more would you have to pay
Not that
if an
much, but I'll pay.
iPhone was made in the U.S.? Come on,
couple extra bucks.
We live in the real world. Come on.